Recorded Books presents What the Devil Knows by C.S. Harris, narrated by Davina Porter. Most of what the devil knows is due to the fact that he's old, rather than because he's the devil. Old Spanish saying. Chapter 1. Saturday, 8th of October, 1814. Molly Maguire hated the fog, hated the way it reeked of coal smoke and tore at her throat, hated the way the damp, suffocating blanket could turn even the most familiar lane into something ghostly and strange. It was always worse at night, when the temperature plummeted and folks lit their fires. That's when the mist would drift up from the docks, swallowing the dark hulls and tall masts of the big ships at anchor out on the river, and creeping along the mean streets and foul alleyways of the part of East London known as Wapping. Sometimes Molly would dream of a different life, the life she'd once known, when cold, wet nights were spent safe and dry in a warm, gently lit cottage. But that life belonged to the past. In this life, Molly walked the streets at night. She'd been on her own since before she turned 13, and she told herself she should be used to it by now. Yet after 3 years, she still shrank from servicing men with foul breath and rough hands and urgent, rutting man-parts. It didn't hurt any more, like it had at first, at least not usually. But Molly still hated it even more than she hated the fog. The bell in the clock tower of St. George's in the east struck midnight, the dull clang sounding oddly loud in the dense fog. If business had been good, Molly would have given up and gone back to the small, wretched room she shared with 5 other girls. But she was desperate for money. It might be Saturday night, but the fog had driven most potential customers off the streets. She'd had a couple of drunken seamen who took turns on her, one right after the other, then demanded a discount. But even they weren't as bad as the fat old magistrate who'd pinned her against one of the looming towers of St. George's. A man like him, he could have bought himself a fine piece of Haymarket ware and tumbled her in the back room of a Covent Garden coffee-house. Instead, he'd picked up a cheap little Wapping doxy and taken her up against the soot-stained old stones of the church, his big hands tearing at her bodice and painfully squeezing her breasts as he thrust into her hard enough to make her wince. She could still smell the stink of his spilled snuff and fine brandy clinging to her. And when it was all over and she'd asked for money, he laughed at her. "I don't pay whores," he said, buttoning his flap over his ponderous gut. "What?" she'd wailed. "What do you think? That I did this because I—" He backhanded her across the mouth, splitting her lip against her teeth. "Consider yourself fortunate that I've decided not to have you committed." "Fat old wagtail," Molly muttered now to herself. It felt good saying it out loud, so she said it again. "Fat old wagtail! Should have lifted his bloody watch, that's what I should have done. He owed me, he—" She broke off as a dark, bulky shadow emerged from the fog swirling up near the corner. Probably old Ben Carter, she thought. She'd already tangled with the watchman once tonight and was in no mood to deal with him again. The black mouth of a noisome alley yawned beside her, and she ducked into it, gagging as the stench of rotting fish heads, rancid cabbage leaves, and what smelled like raw entrails enveloped her. She had her head turned, looking anxiously over her shoulder for the watchman, when her foot caught on something and she pitched forward. "Mother Mary and all the saints," she swore softly as she came down on what felt like a big overstuffed sack. Her outflung hands slid over warm, smooth cloth, and something else, something wet and sticky. Rearing back with a gasp, she stared down at the man before her, at the familiar greatcoat with silver buttons, at the hideous yawning wound in that fat neck, at the fine, once white cravat, now soaked dark with blood. More blood matted his bushy grey hair and swooping side whiskers. She sucked in a quick breath and smelled him, smelled the brandy and the snuff and the blood.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?